Good morning and happy Sabbath to you. I'm glad to see you. I don't know whether all of you know me. I am Emile Van Wyk. I was born in South Africa to a German family. We belong to the Lutheran Church, and in 1962 we became Seventh-day Adventist. I am married to Gerard and Charles, Faith, Joseph, Nadine, and Stephen are our beautiful children. I'm very glad to talk to you today. I want to read, we have the scripture reading, and maybe you can read it there again in a different translation. And James also says to us, count it all joy when you fall into various temptations and various trials. Stories are universal. Stories can teach us lessons. Stories, we can relate to them. And today I want to tell you a story. Jacob met Rachel at the well in Haran, and it was love at first sight. Fast forward a few years, and now Jacob has got two wives and 10 sons. But Jacob loved Rachel more than he loved Leah, and he wanted to have a child with her, and she also wanted to be a mother and to have a child of her own. They both prayed, and one day it happened, and he said to her, "Are you really expecting?" And she nodded. So he took her in his arms, he kissed her, picked her up and swung her around and around. And exactly there where they danced, they knelt down and prayed and thanked God for what he did. And all the time while she was in waiting, Jacob showered her with love and attention. And when little Joseph was born, they attended to all his needs. They loved him, they picked him up, they talked to him, they tickled him, and they played with him, and they prayed with him. It was just wonderful. They flooded him with love. Jacob had a very special relationship with Joseph. He loved him very much because and wherever he went, Joseph was there with him. Joseph loved to be with his father. When they walked in the field, Jacob would tell him about nature. He would tell him about the birds, about the animals, and most of the time about God. He made sure that Joseph knows his God. He told him stories of the beginning, the creation story. He told him about his ancestors, about his great-great-grandfather Abraham and his grandfather Isaac. He loved to hear these stories. And Jacob also told him the story when he had to flee home and how scared and alone and how terrible it was. Joseph loved these stories. Children love stories. And I want to say to the fathers today, Happy Father's Day. And fathers, you don't know how important you are to your family, not just to your wife, but also to your children. Jacob told him his story. He loved it. And he kept this in his heart. He had to tell him the story many times. Jacob taught him to do his work very well, to be faithful, and also to be faithful in the little things. Joseph learned to be obedient. He learned to do what his father and mother told him to do. Jacob taught him. Jacob gave Joseph the best upbringing that you can have, because he resembled Rachel, who is very dear to him. Joseph was also born to him in his old age. The family regularly had worship, and Jacob shared God with all his children. But the older sons were not that interested in that. Joseph told Jacob all the bad things that his brothers were doing. And he was about 6 years old when they left Haran to go back to Canaan. They first lived in Shechem. Jacob bought a piece of land there, and that was the first piece of real estate that the Israelites possessed in the land of Canaan. I know about the cave that Abraham has bought, but that was a burial place. But this piece of land was wonderful, for they lived there some time till two of his sons, Simeon and Levi, did something terrible to the Shechemites. And God told them to move away and go back to Bethlehem. And when they were at Bethel, they moved from there to Hebron. And there in Hebron, they pitched their tent, they lived very happily there. And his little brother Benjamin was very close to him. They loved to play together. And they helped with the sheep. With the little sheep that lost their mothers, they put a little clay bowl and they fed them the milk. And they were shearing the sheep. These two children were also there and helping. And then it was summertime. It was too warm for a warm winter coat. So Joseph took off his coat, folded it neatly, and put it away. And then when the cold winter wind started to blow again, he wanted to put on his coat, but his coat was far too small. And Jacob wanted to make something very special for Joseph. He made him a very special coat. It was not any kind of coat. This coat was fit for royalty. And Joseph was so proud of this coat. He showed his brothers, and his brothers, they were not happy. They didn't like it. They were jealous. They said, "Father never made us coats like this." And then one night, as Joseph was sleeping, he had a dream. He dreamed about he and his brothers were harvesting grain in the field. And all of a sudden, his bundle of grain stood up straight. And all the brothers' bundles circled around him, and they all bowed down to him. This was a strange dream for him. And the next day, he told his brothers this dream. But they didn't like it, and they said, "Little brother, don't think that we are going to bow down to you. We are not ever going to bow down to you." And the next few days just went by, and then he had another dream. He dreamed about the sun, the moon, and the stars, and they all bowed down to him. And he couldn't understand these strange dreams. And he told it again to his brothers, and they were very mad. They just wanted to grab him and do something to him. But Jacob was there, and they dared not do anything. And then it so happened that the sons had to take their flocks to Shechem for grazing. Of course, all the grazing around Haran was finished, and they took them there. And they stayed away for some time. And then Jacob got very worried. He got very worried because he had reason to get worried of what the sons did to the Shechemites, and he was sure that they have not forgotten it. And Jacob sent Joseph to go and check on his brothers and to see what is wrong with them. Why doesn't he hear from them? If only Jacob knew how his brothers felt about Joseph, he would have never sent them, because it will be 22 years before he will see Joseph again. Now Hebron to Shechem is 50 miles, and Joseph quickly walked it in a few days. And then while he was on the field and looking over here and looking over there, he couldn't find his brothers. And then a man saw him walking in circles, and he asked, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm looking for Jacob's sons." And they said, "Oh, yes, they went to Dothan." So Dothan was another 15 miles away. So he walked the 15 miles, and when he was far distance, he could see his brothers there, and he waved to them. He was so glad that he found them. And you know, the brothers were not glad to see him. They planned to kill him. But Reuben, the oldest son, said, "No, let's not kill him. He's our brother. Let's just put him in one of these wells, and he will sooner or later die." But he planned to rescue him and send him back to his father. After a while in the well that was dark and deep, he could hear his brothers' stinging words, what they said about him. They were sarcastic. They didn't like him. And for the first time, Joseph realized how much his brothers hated him. But he also smelled the food that they were eating. They didn't give him anything. He was hurt to think what they were talking about to him. But at last they took him out. They roughly bounded his hands behind his back, and then he saw some camels and a caravan, and he saw the merchants and the traders giving the money to the brothers, and he realized what they were doing. And he said, oh no, you cannot do that. You cannot sell me as a slave. A slave doesn't live long. And Egypt is a very wicked place. There are lots of idols. I cannot go there. Please, Dan, Judah, help me. Simeon, don't let them do it. But was done, and some of the brothers felt the grief in their hearts. But you know, they couldn't do anything because they have gone too far. They took Joseph's beautiful coat. They dipped it in goat's blood. They tore it apart and they took it to Jacob. And when Jacob saw it, he was so heartbroken. He said, "It's my son's coat. It's my son's coat." He tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and ashes. And he was so touched with this terrible pain in his heart. He said, "I will mourn for the rest of my life." The sons tried to comfort him. They were shocked at how terrible his father took the news. They tried to comfort him, but he just waved them off, and he just mourned for Joseph. Joseph was now on his way to Egypt. There in the distance, he could see his father's tents, and he longed to be with his father now. He felt so sad in his loneliness and affliction. He wept bitterly. He could still hear his brother's words, the stinging words that they used for him. What a change in the situation. From the tenderly loved and cherished son to a despised and helpless slave, alone and friendless. And what would his lot be in this strange land? For a time, he gave himself up to uncontrolled grief and terror. Ellen White writes about this situation. She says, "But in the providence of God, even this experience was to be a blessing to him. He had learned in a few hours, which years might not have otherwise taught him. His father, strong and tender as his love had been, had done him wrong by his partiality and indulgence. This unwise preference had angered his brothers and provoked them to the cruel deed that had separated him from his home. Faults that had been encouraged were now to be corrected. He was becoming self-sufficient and tough. Accustomed to the tenderness of his father's care, he felt that he was unprepared to cope with the difficulties before in the bitter, uncared-for life of a stranger and a slave. Then he turned his thoughts to God. He had been taught to love and respect God. He had often heard the story how his father had to flee home and how lonely and scared his father was. And all these precious lessons that he has learned in his early years came back to him. He believed in the God of his father, and he decided that his father's God would be his God. He gave him fully to God and prayed that God would be with him in the land of his exile. In his hour of need, angels of God came to instruct him, to comfort him, and to protect him. But all this time, in his pain and anguish, God was with him. He was watching over him. And on the stand, where he was sold as a slave, he prayed, "Dear God, please help that a good man will buy me." Potiphar, the captain of the guard, bought him. Life is a storm, my friend. You will bask in the sunlight one moment, be scattered on the rocks the next. What makes you a man is what you do when the storm comes. Joseph had a bright mind and he was very well brought up. He quickly learned the language. He learned to read and write in Egyptian. He cut his hair like the Egyptians. He wore the clothes that the Egyptians wear. He ate the food that they ate. He spoke the language that they speak. But there was one thing that Joseph never did. He never prayed to the idols. He always prayed to God in heaven, as his father has taught him. He decided that he will serve the Lord with an undivided heart and do his work faithfully. One day's experience had been the turning point. This terrible calamity had transformed him from a petted son to a man, thoughtful, courageous, and sure of himself. Joseph always did his best, working well, and he had a very pleasant disposition. Everybody noticed it. Potiphar grew very fond of him, and he trusted him and knew that he was blessed because of Joseph. In Patriarchs and Prophets we read, Joseph's gentleness and fidelity won the heart of the chief captain, who came to regard him as a son rather than a slave. The youth was brought in contact with men of rank and learning, and he acquired a knowledge of science, language, and affairs, an education needful to the future Prime Minister of Egypt. Potiphar was blessed because of Joseph, and Potiphar's confidence in Joseph grew daily, and he promoted him to be his steward, with full control of all his possessions. He left it all in the hands of Joseph. Potiphar loved him very much. He worked 10 years for Potiphar, and God blessed Joseph. And Joseph attributed his success to the favor of God. All this time in Potiphar's house, God was with him. Joseph was in the midst of idolatry. He was exposed to false worship and false gods. He was surrounded by the splendor and royalty, supported by the wealth and culture of the most highly civilized nation then in existence. But Joseph preserved his simplicity and his loyalty to God. The sights and sounds of immorality was all around him, but he was like one who saw not and heard not. He stayed faithful to God and to his master. His thoughts were not permitted to linger on forbidden things. The desire to gain the favor of the Egyptians could not cause him to hide his principles. Thoughts and meditation upon the goodness of God for us would close the avenues of the soul to Satan's suggestions. Another terrible temptation came to him, and this temptation was one of no ordinary character. Joseph's faith and integrity would be tested by fiery trials. Potiphar's wife saw that he was young, strong, and beautiful, and she wanted him. She wanted him to transgress God's law. He knew the consequences, maybe a cover-up, maybe a favor, maybe imprisonment, or even death. His whole future depended upon this decision of that moment. Would Joseph be true to God? Joseph's answer proved the power of religious principles. He would not betray his master on earth, and he would be true to his master in heaven. Amen. Joseph's first thought were, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Had he attempted to do any of these evils, he would have been overcome by temptation. He was not ashamed of his religion and that he was a worshipper of the true God. Joseph suffered for his iniquity because she accused him of a foul crime, and he was put in prison. I must tell you, Potiphar did not believe his wife, but he had no other choice. At first, he was treated very harshly by the jailers. He was exposed daily to the daily whip of the overseer. His feet were in chains, and he had an iron collar around his neck. And at night, he was so tired, he just fell asleep on the dirty floor between the lice and the fleas. It is here in prison that he once again gave himself to God. But even here in prison, his beautiful character shined through, and the warden saw that Joseph was different. Joseph heard the groans of his fellow prisoners, and he tried to comfort them. Little by little, he won their confidence. They shared their pain and their suffering with him, and he brought comfort and healing to many. The warden gave him responsibilities and soon put him in charge of the whole prison. His leadership and beautiful character shined through again. We read in Patriarchs and Prophets, Joseph gradually gained the confidence of the keeper of the prison and was finally entrusted with the charge of all the prisoners. It was the part that he acted in prison, the integrity of his daily life, and his sympathy for those who were in trouble and distress that opened the way for his future prosperity and honor. Every ray of light that we shed upon others is reflected upon ourselves. Every kind and sympathizing word spoken to the sorrowful, every act of the relieved and oppressed, and every gift to the needy, if prompted by the right motive, will result in blessings to the giver. Then the king's butler and baker landed in prison. And one day, as Joseph was doing his rounds, he saw that these two were very sad and dejected. And he wondered what was the matter. And he said to them, "Why are you so sad today?" They said, "We each had a dream, and we don't know the meaning of this dream." Joseph said, "Tell me the dream. There's a God in heaven who can explain the dreams to you." They told him the dreams, and Joseph gave them the interpretation. And it happened exactly as Joseph had said. Joseph said to the butler, "Please, when you are out, remember me. Speak to Pharaoh, because I am innocent in this prison, and I long to go home." But the butler forgot. For 2 more years, Joseph had to stay in prison. Joseph became more homesick for his father, and he longed to be free and be back in Hebron. As Joseph longed for home, he prayed that God would help him. But it is here in prison where he picked up insights into the political and social scenes from officials commoners, servants, and slaves. Joseph learned the basic survival skills of the population. Records of case after case passed through his hands, and he gained an understanding of the uses and effects of the use of power. He witnessed a fascinating mix of opinions and viewpoints. He sorted them all out, considered what he would do if he were in charge, and he occupied himself with these solutions. And then he eagerly waited what Pharaoh decided to do on each case. And sometimes he thought that his ideas were better. This information gave him a view of Egyptian life and culture that he would have gotten nowhere else. For prison is a great leveler of the opener of tongues. People talk and they share and they debate opinions. From time to time, inspectors came to inspect the prison. They could not find any fault. Everything was neat, everything was clean. All the records were organized neatly. They could not find one fault. God was preparing Joseph, and here in prison, God was with him. Then Pharaoh had a dream. And Pharaoh had dreamed that night. He dreamed of 7 fat cows coming out of the river Nile. And then after the 7 fat cows, 7 skinny cows came out of the river Nile. These skinny cows ate the fat cows, and they stayed just as skinny. He awoke and he fell asleep again, and he dreamed about the 7 ears of corn. And this dream troubled him tremendously. And he called the wise men. He called the people who speak to the deaf. And he said, come and explain my dream. He told them the dream. And they said, we don't know the meaning of this dream. And he started shouting later. I said, why do I pay you? Can't you tell me what I've dreamed? I need to know. And with all this commotion in the palace, the butler's amnesia awakened. And he quickly grabbed some wine and he took it to Pharaoh, and he told him about Joseph, a Hebrew slave who'd explained their dreams to them. And the Pharaoh said, get him, get him, get him. And they quickly went into the prison. They got him. He shaved, put on clean clothes, and he bowed low before Pharaoh. Pharaoh told him the dream. And Joseph said, I cannot tell you the dream, but there's a God in heaven that will give you, the Pharaoh, answer that will satisfy you. The Pharaoh calmed down. He was so glad. He believed Joseph. And you know what? Joseph even dared to give the king some advice. He bowed again before the king and he said, I suggest that you appoint someone to build large storehouses and gather food for the years of the famine. And the Pharaoh said, where do we get somebody that is able and capable to do this? And he thought, and I think it was God that helped him to decide, because just right there and then he made Joseph governor of Egypt. And he said, only in the throne I will be greater than you. He took off his ring and he gave it to Joseph. And Joseph said, but I'm a slave and a prisoner. He said, not anymore, because now you are my governor. He ordered that very fine linen be put on him. He put a golden chain around his neck. He gave him a golden chariot. He gave him prancing horses, and he took him through the streets in the town, and he told everybody that Joseph is the new governor. He gave him a new wife, Asenath. She was the daughter of Potipharah, who was the high priest of Heliopolis. He gave him a new name to erase his past. But you know what? He later discovered that Joseph was the son of a very important man in Canaan. I want to read to you what Ellen White says. How was Joseph enabled to make such a record of firmness of character, uprightness, and wisdom? In his early years, he had consulted duty rather than inclination, and in the integrity, the simple trust and noble nature of the youth bore fruit in the deeds of a man. A pure and simple life had favored the vigorous development of both physical and intellectual power. Communion with God through his works and the contemplation of the grand truths entrusted to the inheritors of faith had elevated and ennobled his spiritual nature, broadening and strengthening the mind as no other study could do. Faithful attention to duty in every station, from the lowest to the most exalted, had been training every power for his highest servant. He who lives in accordance with the Creator's will is securing to himself the truest and noblest development of character. There are few who realize the influence of little things of life upon the development of character. Nothing which we have to do is really small. The varied circumstances that we meet day by day are designed to test our faithfulness and to qualify us for greater trust. Joseph served Egypt for 80 years. During all this time, he was faithful to God, and he grew through his afflictions, and God was with him. In closing, I would like to read to you again from the clear word, our text that we had today. Happy is the man who isn't influenced by the ungodly, who doesn't participate in the ways of evildoers, and who doesn't scoff at God, but who delights in the law of the Lord and meditates daily on God's word. He will be like a tree planted by a stream, bearing fruit in its season and keeping its leaves in times of drought. The good he does will last forever. Thank you.